so it's not for kids.
Describe creating a verb is you are like sucking in the air, but you're like passing it over the top of your throat. It's like creating bubbles as it comes in.
You think that's how they invented brass instruments? It's probably it.
They were like, what if I could burp as a prolonged sound? That's how they came up with it.
It's weird to think that burps predate instruments.
It's true.
Somehow burps feel more recent, but maybe it's because like culturally the way we perceive burps is more prescient in the modern times. Like it's more associated from a humor perspective. I bet you people were laughing at farts before they were laughing at burps.
This is like a great hypothetical for like, what do you think happens more in a day, farts or burps?
Pretty sure it's burps.
Oh, I think it's like one of those unknowable things like wheels or doors, you know? It's like...
Well, I'm going to Google, when did burps become funny?
The AI answer is just kind of like, burps have always been intrinsically funny, of course. As a non-human, I can't relate to that.
There is a Sumerian joke that says, something which has never occurred since time immemorial. A young woman did not fart in her husband's lap. Interesting.
The joke is like a woman has never farted in her husband's lap. That's what the joke is.
Yeah, I don't know. You know what? They were on some different stuff in Sumeria. I'm just going to say. A BBC news article that says flatulence joke is the world's oldest. Breaking news about breaking wind. The world's oldest joke is a one-liner about flatulence, researchers say.
You know, the person who had to like write that title was like, hell yeah, this one's so good. Like they probably got to a pizza party for the whole staff room off of that one.
That is really good as a headline.
Yeah.
Breaking news for breaking wind.
Yeah.
I do think that people who are above fart jokes need to touch grass.
Okay.
There's something going on where you're like, really? You think that's funny?
You know, we shouldn't be so judgmental about people who are like trying to get into Mensa, Kenny. Everybody needs a community of some kind.
I do think we go a little too hard. You know, there is like a good middle ground, but like if your reaction to a fart is like, I don't think that's funny, you need to take a hard look in the mirror. Something happened.
Yeah, Mom.
Welcome to Shelf Stable, a podcast celebrating farts that have stood the test of time. I'm your host, Kenny Katayama.
And I'm the other host, Tom Bowers. Today, the main topic is IP in games. No... I don't actually do that. We're not talking about that kind of thing. We're talking about intellectual property in games, okay? They got me with
the moment the words left your mouth, we both realized, yeah.
I really got set up here with the teleprompter. Before we talk about that, though, we're just going to talk about some kind of fucking shit we've been playing recently. Kenny, take it away. Tom,
I've been playing a lot of PitchCar from 1995. Jean de Poël, published by Ferti. It's like sound like farty.
You're really starting to sauce strong here. Just like, yeah, episode's gonna be about like farting.
PitchCar, for the uninitiated, is kind of a grail game. I mean, it's not on the scale of like Glory to Rome, but it is hard to come by and it's rather expensive. Shout out to Austin again. They were getting rid of their copy, and then I was like, oh, I would totally play that with my daughter. And then they gave me like a super good deal on it. So I have been playing it a ton on repeat since the swap, which was sometime last month, because my daughter really enjoys it. So she's the one who kind of sets up the tracks. She has a running joke. She's like, okay, I'm going to set up a really complicated track. And then she just does like a single circle. Like the smallest possible thing. And then she like looks at me and she's like, eh? And I'm like, oh, you silly goose. And then she laughs. So she'll always do that first. And then she'll set up an actual track. We'll play around. We'll go around the track a few times. And she's like, okay, I'm going to set up a new one. And we'll just do that on and off whenever she gets inspired. The game is So simple. If you've ever seen like crokinole pieces, you've basically got one of those wooden discs that has a sticker of a race car on it. That's your car. That's your PitchCar. And then you're flicking that around. You just take turns flicking it. If you go off the side of the racetrack, basically past your turn, you've unsuccessfully flicked, and you go back to where you were. You're just trying to get around the track first. There's all kinds of cool pieces that you can get that upgrade the game. I don't have any of those. I just have the base game. But I've been having a lot of fun playing this with my family. It's kind of cool how easy it is to get going and the fact that little kids can play. But then there's also like a really high skill ceiling because the instinct is like, oh, just like go in a straight line, use the rails where you can to curve. But there's all kinds of cool like little flourishes that you can do where you cut corners that make it a little bit more interesting. And because, it's very low stakes, you're just playing with your kids, you can kind of give yourself an opportunity to mess around and do some of that stuff. I'm definitely not any good, but I've been able to do things that I wasn't able to do when I first started playing that are making me go like, oh.
You're like, wow, there really is like some kind of skill to this, I suppose. No, I always see this game at like conventions. There is always a PitchCar tournament.
Yeah, it's got a really good table presence because you're like, what is that? But you can immediately understand what's going on even if you don't know the rules. It's a pretty easy to parse game.
Now, do you have the loop-to-loop?
No, unfortunately. So the base game is expensive. I'm pretty sure that loop-to-loop is like going to be 10 times the price because those were not easy to come by. But yeah, there's also like a ramp with a gap in the middle. There's all kinds of cool additional pieces.
But you never play with those because you're always on the circle track.
I'm always on the little circle track, yeah. Crazy to think that my daughter would be a troll. I don't know where she got that from.
I can imagine that she has done this like literally every time, which is like really funny to me because it's just like, yeah, children like, it's never not funny. Like, it's like it worked the first time. Like I'm going to send it again and again and again.
Oh yeah. When children get a bit going, like that's it. Watch this, buddy. Like you're going to love this one. I know you've heard it, but you're going to love it again. And if you don't, I'm going to be upset.
It's kind of like this show and Monopoly Deal in a way. It's just like,
for sure. Yeah.
Okay. Well, cool. PitchCar, the classic. Let's talk about my game. The game that I've been playing recently, Kenny, is called Kobayakawa from 2013. This is designed by Jun Sasaki of Oink Games, the Oink Games guy.
I think it's pronounced Games.
It might be. Kobayakawa is cool because it's a betting game. It's almost like a poker-like game, which I think is like sort of rare for a game to be that isn't just like an actual version of poker. Everyone's dealt a card, and then in the center is another card. The cards have a number, let's say like 1 through 21 on them. After you draw a card and decide to replace your own card, or alternatively, flip a card at random to replace the middle card, then you can basically make some bets. And what you're betting on is that you have the biggest number. But the catch is that whoever gets the lowest number in front of them gets to add the middle number to their score. So it's not as simple as like, oh, I drew the 21. I guaranteed win. You have to draw the 21 and know that the player who calls your bet has a number that is so low that even with the help of the middle card, they still lose.
I'm having a hard time visualizing it.
Yeah, it makes a lot more sense at the table, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Like the point is, it simplifies all the hand strength stuff of Texas Hold'em, so you can kind of do away with all of that. And I do think that the betting rounds are like less interesting probably than something like Texas Hold'em or even Omaha or any other poker strategy game. But what you get in exchange for like the simplicity of those things is a much funnier experience, I think, overall, and one where the stakes in general feel like less serious. On top of which, what makes it fun is that if you bowed out of the round and you don't think you have a shot at winning, you can then basically make side bets on who you think will actually win. And really, I think that's
cool.
The game can allow you to foster as much or as little social encouragement as you want at those different stages. Like you can allow players to tell the other people what they have in front of them before it's revealed and stuff. You could kind of make your own rules to that as far as like what you think is fair or not. But I think it's definitely funnier when like you can kind of negotiate nearly anything without maybe saying like the actual number. Might be the one rule you'd have to do.
Where do you think this stands as far as Oink games? Because this is not one I hear about as often.
Yeah, I don't know why it doesn't come up more. I mean, it has like a long string of Japanese phonetics, so I wonder if that's part of like its marketability is kind of challenging for English speakers. When you look at the box, the kanji just shows mountain, field, river. It's like those 3 kanji, and that's what that is, Kobayakawa. It was like, what does that mean? What does that have to do with the game? So I think it like doesn't sell itself very well, unfortunately. Where it ranks for me, I think I like this one more than whatever that Insider game is. I think it does more interesting things while still aping on existing genres. I don't know that this out-competes Scout, but at least from the limited experience of what I've had with Oink games, I like this one more. I think I'd be sooner to return to this, at least at this point in time, than Deep Sea Adventure or whatever it's called. And like I said, I haven't played every Oink game ever.
Did you prefer it to startups?
Yes, yeah. But
Okay.
it's like, it's kind of marginal, admittedly. And I could see it not actually being super fun with like multiple repeat plays. I think like this could get kind of like unexciting if you played it over and over and over again, because it just turns out that it's way too swingy and chaotic, and like there's not really a lot of control over the game, in which case it just is like there's other things you can do to like have swingy, chaotic fun and socialize. I'd be curious almost to give it that kind of treatment and find out if it turns out that no, there's actually like there's a lot of information that you can glean from the patterns of behavior that you see, and then and you can build on that and like the betting strategies. I don't know. It's tough to say just because there's a lot of like limitation to how much you can know and what the bet sizings can even be. Because there's literally a hard built like limit of 3 chips. So I'm not really sure exactly like how it plays out over repeat sessions. Anyway, that's Kobayakawa from 2013.
Tom, you're never going to believe this, but Netrunner is a good game. We're going to be talking about Android Netrunner from 2012. The original Netrunner published in 1996. This is a design originally by Richard Garfield, with the Android version being developed and overseen by Lukas Litzsinger, published by Fantasy Flight Games. So our group, courtesy of Ian, has been setting up a Return to Netrunner event that's coming up near the end of this month.
Yeah, he's calling it Make Netrunner Great Again, I think.
Oh, God. Is he really calling it that?
No.
We are revisiting the game chronologically as different sets came out. So for the first set, for those who are familiar, we're doing the original base set plus the first cycle, the first Genesis cycle is what it's called. And so that is our card pool. Erratas are not in effect. There's no restricted lists, anything like that. I think the approach that everybody is taking for this, as far as I know, is to make decks that are like relatively decent and competitive, but not make the thing that is just degenerate and will destroy everyone. Like, we're trying to have a good time with it. Taylor and I got to play a bunch of games in sequence to kind of fine tune and figure out what we were going to play. And it just reminded me of how good Netrunner is. I mean, it's no surprise to dedicated listeners. Like, Netrunner is the game that Tom and I met through, and it's the game that we fell in love with, that we played almost exclusively for a number of years. I think this play of it just kind of reminded me why it's so special and why it kind of like has such an important place in our hearts. There's so much versatility in what seems to be like a deck construction game on the surface. When you're actually playing it, it very much feels more like a board game than like a Magic the Gathering. It has that element of deck construction paired with just this action economy that is so compelling and has so many layers to it. Taylor is less familiar with Netrunner than Tom and I are, for example. And so I was explaining to her some of the things, like she would walk me through her thought process and ask questions and things like that. And it just made me realize how much stuff I have internalized that is not familiar to new players things that even like people who are really, really good at games like Taylor just wouldn't know on the surface without having played games and games and games of this. It kind of reminds me of like Twilight Struggle in a certain way, where like the first few times you play Twilight Struggle, you're just not going to interface with it on the layer that people who have played 100 games of it are. It's crazy how much stuff is packed in our brains, Tom, of things that we take for granted, heuristics that we take for granted when we're playing a game of Netrunner. There's just so much depth to this game, and it's insane. It's kind of like, I imagine this is how people feel like when they play chess or when they play Go or something. Like there's just layers and layers and layers of different things that go into each individual action, which is like, it made me appreciate the beauty to a certain extent of like, I don't know how Richard Garfield came up with this game and how we got to where this was played, but like the outcome of it is like so impressive. And I think FFG did a really good job of taking the best parts of it and making it even better.
It's such a shame, you know. I've been thinking about the game myself a lot recently too, and well, pretty much for the exact same reasons that you laid out at the top. Now, I haven't gotten to actually play with the classic cards with anyone yet. I'm looking forward to this event we've got going on. But even just kind of digging through the pile of shit that came out in Genesis Cycle, I was like, man, they really killed this game, like, right, I think, as it was entering what could have been its peak era. We really ought to get, like, Michael Boggs or someone who was there, like, when they killed it, like, on the show, so we can ask them how they felt. But I was looking at, like, these cards, and there were just so many design choices that seemed so ill-conceived, shall we say, early on in the game, that at the same time were really interesting or fun. Like a lot of like just like bizarre things. They really didn't know what they had or kind of where they should take things. And then you could feel, I think, the craft of the card design getting honed as the years went on. And the game just got like better and better. Its ups and downs, I think it struggled a bit with some of the power level that was starting to creep in toward the later years. But that's the other thing too, is that it feels like they were just starting to figure out like the right balance to take and how to really craft the metagame. And then all of a sudden it was just like rug pull, just like, nope, like you don't get to make the game anymore. It's really devastating that it happened like that. But while I'm glad that like the fan community was able to take over and like Null Signal Games like continues to operate things to any amount of like organized extent, it's just not nearly the same like production cycle, and they don't have the same level of resources available to them. It's definitely a different vibe. But so it's just like a shame that all those years of work in sharpening just suddenly got obliterated.
Yeah, Tom and I kind of have like varied perspectives on the Null Signal Games continuation. So for those who aren't familiar, Null Signal Games is an entirely fan-run. I want to say it's a business at this point. I don't know if it's like maybe collective is a better term.
Yeah, something like that.
Employed professionals who go and create follow-up fan sets for Netrunner to keep the game alive and to continue it that have a huge amount of production quality to them. The art is as good as the art that was in the Fantasy Flight for the more recent sets. Some of the designs are really interesting, really compelling. Some of the world building too.
I have like a ton of respect for all the work that their community does. I do think early on I was personally like a bit critical about the design choices that they were making. I honestly haven't kept up with it enough to be able to speak to anything they've come out with more recently. But early on, it felt like there was a lot of desire from the people who were making the cards to balance things, to really, really, really like mitigate power levels, keep the game like as even and as close to a coin flip between corporation and runner as possible. It felt like the entire focus was on like creating a somewhat like predictable win rate for both sides to some extent. And obviously like, you know, some cards just still managed to sort of outpace others and all that sort of stuff came about. I just felt like the metagame, at least in those early years when Null Signal took over, was like not
bland.
Yeah, like bland. And in particular, what they released was like a introductory set to kind of teach people how to play the game. And in retrospect, and I'm curious if any of them feel the same way, I thought that the cards were almost needlessly complicated for being what's supposed to be someone's introduction to the game. And at the same time, they weren't very flashy. They weren't very dynamic. They felt like they were designed by and for people that were already indebted to this game. Big difference from what FFG came out with in 2012, which felt like flashy. They took some of the wildest cards from the original game and like just straight up recreated them. You know, the power level was broken on a handful of the cards, that's for sure. But I think it worked in their favor. I think it's a design philosophy that like Richard Garfield himself has actually spoken to before. It's just like some amount of players, they knew that like Ancestral Recall was generally kind of good. They knew that Time Walk was probably better than it should be. But it was like, if the demand for those things outpaced production, they'd have the opposite of a problem. And I think that like that approach seemingly was built into what Android Netrunner was as a box. If you looked at it as a standalone game, you were getting the flash, you were getting the pizzazz of Netrunner. And if you found yourself becoming involved in organized play, then you could find out about what cards in that box were banned and stuff like that, right? Whereas the design philosophy that seemed to drive System Gateway with Null Signal Games was not as focused on flash and like, you know, excitement.
So I agree that the cards were less flashy, but I do think they were a lot more accessible for somebody that's first getting into the game. And we saw that. We saw a lot of people who had either not played Android Netrunner or had bounced off of Android Netrunner early on return to Netrunner with Null Signal Games' System Gateway is what it was called, because they felt like this was actually tailored to them. So I think it's just a different approach. I definitely think the cards were less crazy and less exciting. I agree with you on that. But sometimes that can be an unfun thing. If you feel like you're doing a good job and all of a sudden somebody plays a card and you read the text and you're like, what? This lets you do what? And then you just lose. That can be as unpleasant an experience and not anything having like a flashy card text going on.
Yeah, I can see where you're coming from with that. It's like, you know, someone can be more embittered by the idea that the game is somehow really swingy rather than excited by the idea that like something can have such a profound effect like a Count Siphon.
You also have to bear in mind that System Gateway was created with the idea that there's already existing cards in play. One, there's not the buy-in needed to get a completely blank slate collection of fans invested in this game. A lot of people are coming from the existing game. And so what they need is a stable environment, not something to hype them up. It's a decision, right? I'm not saying it's better than having printed a bunch of crazy stuff, but there's not as much of a stake to get people on board the way the original Android Netrunner had to get people on board. And secondly, you got to balance things because those existing cards are still valid in a lot of tournament formats. Not every card is valid, but depending on what you were playing, those cards were still usable. And so it's not as simple as like, there's nothing else out here, so we just have to fine tune these cards. You got to figure out how they come into play with existing things. Give people the tools so that they can build basic decks just with this set, while also making sure they're not getting two play sets of a really powerful card because that other card already exists, or making a certain strategy devolve into something that makes the game unfun for people that are playing a more standard format or something like that. It's a really tough situation for them to navigate, and I think they did it well. And I think following sets have been a little bit more ambitious with the card effects that they do, and when I read them, I'm just like, oh, wow, I didn't know this was in the game. This is crazy. So
I think the biggest criticism I have is that just like the environment that they were in, the introductory set that they made, I think makes it hard to sell people on what the game really can be just out of that package. But I don't even know that it's relevant anymore. All that aside, like, it's still a great game. Like, whether you're finding it secondhand at this point in time, like lucky enough to pick it up at a thrift store, that's probably not happening. But find a way to play it online for free. Just go online and order print to order versions of the cards. Why not go nuts? Make your own copies at home. It's worth trying it out one way or another. And you know what? we have been failing to mention this to people, but I at least will be at SaltCon here in a few weeks in March. I think it's like March 11th through the 15th, roughly. And I'll be there. And if you hit me up, I'll play Netrunner with you. How about that?
There you go. Sounds great to me.
Android Netrunner. That's what that was from 2012. I'm going to transition into a Netrunner-like card game from 2021. This is Radlands, designed by Daniel Piechnik, and this is published by Roxley. Radlands, I say it's Netrunner adjacent because I think it definitely feels like some of its mechanisms were derived or inspired by Netrunner, and I'll get to that.
I would agree, yeah.
And then on top of that, like it is a head-to-head card game that comes in a box that you can buy the box as it is. This is kind of like something between the fan-made Dan variant of Magic and Android Netrunner, and even something a little bit Card Wars, if you've ever played that Adventure Time tie-in. The core conceit of the game is that you have like 3 towers that you have to defend from your opponent, who also has 3 towers. You need to destroy their towers before they destroy yours. And then you can play punks in front of your towers to basically block access to those towers. It is a lane battling game where the stuff placed at the top of the lane is in front, and therefore it protects the stuff behind. So it even kind of works like the ice in Netrunner in that way. And then every turn you get loaded up with 3 water tokens. Those represent the energy system, the cost, the mana, the clicks, whatever you want to call it, right? And that's the main resource that you have to work with that allows you to actually put cards down into play and then pay to activate them. And then at the same time that it has all this going on, it even has elements of cube drafting or just any other draft game. At the start of the game, you get to decide from a selection of 6 which camps that you start with, and they all have unique powers. And then on top of that, the powers are somewhat mitigated by the fact that the number of cards you actually get to draw up with and start the game with is going to be limited, somewhat seemingly proportionally to the power level of the ability on that camp. This only recently turned shelf stable, so we haven't actually talked about it on the show before, but you and I have played this. We were both kind of very excited about it for a variety of reasons because of its Netrunner adjacency. Shout out Shelfside. Your video really got me excited about this game, I think, in particular. I think at the time, the way we felt coming away from the game was like, it was a little overhyped.
Mm-hmm.
I played it again recently, and I now feel, actually, I think I kind of get what they might have been going on about. I think that like the decision making in this game, once you kind of start to get the hang of it, really does feel akin to like limited Magic the Gathering, or any of those other games where it's like you sometimes have to recognize like where you need to pivot and just become aggressive, and like that's going to be your line. Like sure, your opponent could draw something off the top and it's just going to fuck you over, but assuming that they don't hit exactly that one thing or exactly what they need, your winning line is like go all in on damage on the camps or something like that, right? That's the experience that I had with this session that I played. It was like a very tight, like tense game. And I don't think you always get that out of Radlands because of like the randomness of, you know, both the setup and the deck and the variants. Like sometimes you're just going to have like basically non-games. But I think like for every non-game you get, there's going to be some number of games that are more like what I experienced most recently, which is like that tense thing where you recognize your outs, you lean into those outs and it pays off or something like that, right? But it could have easily swung the other way if the opponent had just been a little bit luckier, if they'd maybe strategized slightly differently. It's like there's so much to like have considered, thought about. Anyway,
I only played this once with you. I was very excited for it. I felt like right off the bat, it was interesting. Mm-hmm. I like that it has an action economy similar to Netrunner. So it's kind of poignant that we're bringing those up in parallel. I've only played it online on using the app, but I've also played Mindbug by Richard Garfield. And it definitely reminds me of Mindbug to a certain extent, where you have a shared deck And it gives you that battling feel without having to build a deck or, while having a little bit of randomness in terms of who gets what. I think I prefer Radlands to Mindbug because even though it's a little bit more complicated and hard to teach, I feel like you have a bit more control and it feels like you have those interesting decisions to make, whereas Mindbug can sometimes be play card, crazy stuff happens. What I think is a bigger thing is I think we need more of these games. The 2-player space has kind of gone in the direction of lane battles where people have the exact same cards on each side. One that I think is kind of a flagship of this is like Air, Land, and Sea. I think this is the trend for these kind of games. I wish we would go more in the direction of Mindbug and Radlands, where it very much leans into kind of the craziness of things that are happening. Maybe it's going to get you those dud moments like you mentioned, Tom. But I think these games are going to be more exciting overall than having like a set amount of cards that are like the same for each player and then you kind of like play it repeat times. I actually like games that have like simplistic setups like that where you can study them and get better at them. But it's more of just like, I feel like we've been oversaturated and gone that direction a little too hard when there's like this alternative right here that's also really interesting.
Yeah, it's a funny kind of almost catch-22 in a way where if there's a lot more games like Radlands, that just means that there's a lot more that you have to kind of choose from in terms of like, what am I going to dedicate my meta knowledge to, right? Because on some level, like in order to get the most out of a game like this, you want to have repeat plays. So you have to hit that sort of threshold. And Magic the Gathering's the same way. Netrunner's the same way. Like, there's a lot of these kind of things that are going to be competing for your attention. To that end, I'm like, we don't necessarily need more of that. But I hear what you're saying, where it's like, if what you want to make is like 2-player battling game, something that is perfectly balanced but kind of dry, kind of stale, is not necessarily the direction you need to be thinking in. You need to think like, what is going to lead to like dynamic, like boards that can change on a dime, like where people are drawing to outs, where maybe they don't know what they're looking for. But when they draw it off the top, they're going to be like, oh, this changes everything type moments. I think creating those more is going to lead to more enjoyment, more fun, even if the trade-off is that there's some sessions where it's just over in like 3 turns. It's very obvious, and you have to go back to resetting the game. Some of the best games, that's the trade-off, and it's well worth it, really.
It was a Radlands from 2021.
100 games to play before you die.
I want to be able to, on the spot, deliver if Joker could beatbox flawlessly at any given time. But I'll save that for like retirement or something. Imagine me in the retirement home doing it though. Like, wouldn't that be so good?
Oh God!
Hey guys, remember this? Why so serious?
I'm gonna request a different retirement home and then just meet up with you on the weekends or something.
I'm gonna be your live-in nurse, actually.
Oh God! Even worse.
What it's gonna be. All right, Kenny, it's time to talk about the 100 games that you're required to play before you end up in a retirement home with me as your live-in nurse. And game number 65 on that list, it's the Castles of Burgundy from 2011. This is designed by Stefan Feld, rather.
Stephen Field.
This is designed by Steven Universe, then published by Alea. Kenny, why the frick is this on the list?
Stefan Feld. We love Stefan Feld here. Castles of Burgundy. You love this game, Tom.
I do enjoy this game.
This game where you got a cool core mechanism, and then you have a bunch of ways to get points via that mechanism. In other words, it's a Stefan Feld game. The more we get into the 100 games list, the more we're going to see archetypes that are often characterized by a school of thought or characterized by a particular designer. That's what we're seeing here. I think the thing that is really notable about Stefan Feld games is they feel like Stefan Feld games. We're talking about things like Castles and onwards, because I'd argue some of Stefan's games prior to Castles of Burgundy were a little more varied in terms of how much interaction they have, how much the actions feed into different ways of scoring, things like that. Castle of Burgundy was such a big hit that Stefan went more in the direction of this game versus things like Notre Dame or like In the Year of the Dragon, for example. After that, it was basically like, how can I repeat this in different ways that still are interesting, but, you know, following this general model of like, this is going to explode into a bunch of different decisions that get you a bunch of points. The ultimate treat for some players of board games. Like, this is what they seek, is like, I want a very interesting, complex action selection system, and then a labyrinth of point scoring that I don't know how to navigate. When I think point salad, I think of Stefan Feld's games. It's not for me personally, but that's less of like, I think they're bad games as much as like, that's not what I seek. You know, I'm looking for a little bit more of like a very obvious, what is the goal in the game? And then how do I further that via various avenues versus evaluating my performance via points and that being a little bit more obfuscated. But that's a personal preference. I understand why these games are so popular, and I kind of respect it. And I actually really like Castle of Burgundy. I think this one, because the action selection system at its core is so nice, you know, you roll 2 dice and then you have a bunch of options on how you use those dice. It just feels really good to play.
Yeah, I was trying to pin down what exactly makes me appreciate this game so much. I think the main idea is that it strikes a really nice balance between randomness and outcomes, the choices you get to make as a player, what you are building towards, what you are willing to kind of risk in order to score bigger combos. You're constantly experiencing this tension of not being totally sure if you want to spend your dice on these 2 particular things, because there's so many things that you could do instead, and you don't know exactly what that next roll is going to be. But the more that you can mitigate it, the more you can kind of like capitalize and chain things together, like the better you feel. And when you've set things up to allow that next turn to come around where you really just kind of get rewarded for having taken that risk or sort of allowed your luck to, you know, allowed yourself to get lucky because maybe you didn't take a depot and then you were worried that it wouldn't come back around to you, but now that depot is still there. Stuff like that. There's so many cool, like, tense moments in a game that is like, you know, on the surface, like pretty brown, kind of boring. I do think this game has like maybe one major flaw, which is that there's a bunch of special effects that all come from like a list of buildings that all look somewhat interchangeable. I think that's like the hardest thing to kind of get over with this game. But even with that said, I think it's like, this is like the cream of the crop when it comes to these types of games where it's a big puzzle of chain reactions, but you never have perfect information. And I like that feeling in general.
Yeah, I like that too. I think people tend to say that Stefan Feld's games don't have a lot of interaction. I think I might have even said something like that in the past. I don't really think that's the case anymore. I think quite a bit of Stefan's games are interactive. I'm not even just saying like passively with decisioning. I think Castles is kind of like, oh, you know, you took that thing that I wanted kind of thing. They do have quite a bit of interaction. I think the bigger characteristic is just the pointality aspect of it. But yeah, I think there's a really good tension that comes out of Castles, especially when you play that like 2 players that can feel really really compelling. It's
one of those games too where as soon as you go to try and play it online on Board Game Arena, you just get trounced instantly, and you're like, oh my god, there's like a whole world to this, isn't there? And like, yep,
yeah,
there
exactly.
almost definitely is. Like, you know, so it has the depth to it too. It just really does kind of have everything. I think it's like an optimal choice for the list, frankly.
That was Castles of Burgundy.
Okay, Kenny, enough talking about games, enough talking about turning old, enough talking about whatever the fuck we've been talking about.
Yeah, enough talking about games. Now let's talk about games.
Let's talk about some games, and that's the main topic of this week's episode. The main topic is games, not just any games, the games that I pee in. I mean, the games that have tie-ins with intellectual property. Did I do the real meat and potatoes part? I don't think I did. The real meat and potatoes this week, the part of the show that people actually listen to. IP in games. There's no way of saying that that's like good. Like that we really chose the worst way to write this. Intellectual property. What does that mean exactly?
This means when there's like movie or video game or TV or book tie-ins to the board game, that it's not an original world. It's riding on an existing theme that isn't just like a public domain theme. So there's quite a few perceptions about IP-based games. I think for the longest time, anytime you saw an IP on a board game, the assumption was going to be like, oh no, this is going to suck. I don't think that's the case anymore. And I kind of wanted to explore like which ones are good, which ones are bad. How do you use an IP effectively? What do we think has changed in the recent years?
The first thought I had when we talked about like IP is the Lord of the Rings and how it's been with us as a property tie-in, like literally since the 90s. What was it? It's literally Knizia, The Confrontation, right? I don't think that's the earliest Lord of the Rings board game by any means.
It's one of the first good ones for sure. And then Knizia also did Lord of the Rings, which is like the pretty early co-op game. So
yeah, you know, it's like it's been there, like ready to be adapted to this format for so long. And I was thinking about like why that would be, and I think it kind of has to do with like why Lord of the Rings has such a hold over the fantasy genre in general, is that it's like it's simultaneously so genre defining and so kind of like diverse in the stories that are possible through it, that it just serves as like a template that you can adapt into almost anything. I mean, like I was trying to think about like what the most absurd possible thing that they could turn into a Lord of the Rings tie-in, and like they probably could, and I don't even think it would be all that hard. It's very versatile and adaptable as something that it still has like recognition. But what's funny about it to me is that it nearly is public domain, or like it really ought to be at this point. It's crazy that it's not.
I'm looking it up. It looks like the oldest game I can find that's specifically about Lord of the Rings is a roll and move game from 1970 called Conquest of the Ring, a Middle-earth game for the entire family.
Yeah, making a game where it's just literally fucking Candyland with the Lord of the Rings theme is exactly right for like being one of the earliest, because that makes the most sense.
Interestingly enough, then in 1974, only 4 years later, we get a hex encounter map for doing like a war game, Battle of Helm's Deep.
Oh, cool. I wonder like how collectible or like what the going rate is on the niche, like Avalon Hill, presumably, Lord of the Rings war games.
Oh, probably a lot. Some of those go for quite a bit.
I was going to say, I can imagine that being like at least one person's niche. And I'd like to meet that person because I'm curious like how many of them stand out and what those war games that are really good, like what they did right.
What did the ones that did things good do that the other ones didn't? That was a mouthful. Holy moly.
Yeah, I feel like these days, a lot of the adaptation you get is just effectively like fucking Frodo taking the damn ring to the mountain again. You know, and it's like...
Here we go again.
And I mean, like, I get that that's like probably the most resonant story that can possibly be told from that universe, but I got a big kick out of fucking Shadow of Mordor, the video game, you know, and like that has nothing to do with any of those guys. So it seems like there would be like a wider possible range.
So obviously there's a difference between games that try to truly make something reminiscent of their material versus games that just skin an existing game. I don't want to spend too much time on like the Cryptozoic deck builders, for example. We know they literally take Batman's cards from the DC deck building game. They put Ryu from Street Fighter on them, and then they call it a day. Like you can look at them one to one, and like the Batman's kit is like draw card, draw card, draw card, and then you look at Ken's kit, and it's like draw card, draw two cards, draw card. Like I guess Batman is canonically Ryu in the Street Fighter universe. That to me is not an interesting thing to talk about. I think the reason that we've seen so much of this was because for a while it was a dramatic overlap between board gamers and Funko Pop collectors. This is my thesis. This is what I'm going to write my dissertation about.
Well, aren't Funko Pop collectors just literally like nerds? Like it's just like nerd culture shit.
It's like a specific part of nerd culture of like, I'm going to interface with nerd culture in a way where like possessing objects is what represents my identity, and knowing where something came from and or like a reference, which is different from nerd culture. Like I'm really into a particular entity and I'm going to like learn everything about it and be obsessed with it. The person who has memorabilia of Star Wars is different from the person that studies Star Wars's extended lore. I think there's overlap. Don't get me wrong.
That memorize the date of birth and lineage of Glupshido, for example. That's
yeah, exactly.
Well, there's obviously overlap though, but I think I get what you're saying, where it's like there's like it's almost like nerd chic, or it's just sort of like the facade of like, yeah, I mean, like we sound like gatekeepers, but like to some level, I guess like that is the case where it's like I grew up with that, and like now it's semi-mainstream or mainstream enough, I guess, for plastics manufacturers to create a toy that my ass is going to buy. We should tread somewhat lightly and not necessarily yuck the yum.
Right. Yeah, I'm trying to be respectful here, like, because we have a bias for sure. Like, we are pretty anti-consumerist, especially when there's not like a game to be experienced out of it.
There's no practicality to the Funko Pops. It's like, what?
Yeah, I don't think our take is right per se. It's just like we are not a fan of the Funko lifestyle.
What it promises you is that you can enshrine your interests, and or someone might pass that off as their personality, is that like this represents like what I'm about. And it's like, well, what does that actually signify? What does that mean? You've built a temple into what?
Right, yeah. So my thesis, whether it's a changing in the attitude of nerd culture or just publishers seeing more profitability over time, I don't know what the reason is, but my theory is that over time, consumers have moved away from just wanting something that represents what they're passionate about to wanting something that actually provides them the experience of the thing they're passionate about. And that's why we're seeing a lot more board games that A, are of higher quality, but B, also really seek to integrate the experience of whatever IP versus just being a skin, which I think is a really positive thing from my perspective. I would much rather have things that evoke the original theme versus just having quotes and screenshots and things like that.
I'm going to quasi disagree.
Interesting. Okay.
Let me explain exactly. I think you're kind of onto something, which is the idea that people want to experience Slay the Spire, for example. It's the first thing I can think of, right? I want to recontextualize the video game experience of Slay the Spire as a board game, right? And I do think they did that, and they did that very successfully. I think it's a good, playable, true simulacra of Slay the Spire. But I am someone who thinks that it would be better if these adaptations sought to use the source material and not just slap them lazily onto any generic deck builder, but to use the source material and then adapt it in ways
that make their own thing.
Like heighten or change the experience. And we had this happen with Dorfromantik in particular.
Oh, that's an interesting one, yeah.
Like, I don't really personally understand the motivation to play Dorfromantik, the board game, other than, I suppose, the fact that you can share it with other people now, which is not something you can get from the computer game because it's like solo only. And that is also true of Slay the Spire. It's like, it's a way to play it.
I'm a little confused as to why you think Dorfromantik, the board game, did something interesting while Slay the Spire, the board game, didn't. Because to me,
no, I'm saying they did the same thing. They did the same.
Okay, you're saying they did the same thing. They just reproduced the experience.
Yeah.
I'm going to play the audience here. I think it's significantly different to have a cooperative experience in Slay the Spire. I can't speak to Dorfromantik, but that's what I've heard people time and time again say about Slay the Spire, the board game.
I totally get that. And like, I just think like I'm personally inclined
You're not looking for that.
I want to tell people that like adaptations that get things wrong are actually better sometimes.
No, I agree with that. I think you're kind of playing in a weird niche, though, because you're talking about board games that adapt video games, and those are few and far between. Like usually it's movies and TV and sometimes comics. Yeah.
Well, we've been seeing it more and more. I think, like, you know, we had like the fucking Dark Souls game. There's a Stardew Valley board game out there. Yeah. There's Minecraft board games. That's like a good example of the adaptation being different than the source material.
That's true,
for example. And I think some of those have been, in some ways, like more successful or even just more interesting than others. Like Builders and Biomes, for example, has a somewhat unique, like,
I think you can make an argument for more interesting, but you've just listed Slay the Spire and Dorfromantic, which I think are arguably the most successful video game to board game transitions that are out on the market.
Well, you know what? Fucking Avengers Endgame was the most successful movie of all time.
Yeah, I think you can say more interesting, but I don't think you can say more successful. I just think that's wrong.
Oh yeah. If people are listening to this show thinking like, how can I actually find like market success in capitalist society? They're on the wrong ass show, let me tell you. I'm not giving advice that's going to make anyone make a board game that will
you're
make
talking
them rich.
If you want to make something substantial or interesting, which I'm kind of with you there. I do think the Minecraft Builders and Biomes did something interesting with that wall cube thing, the cube wall.
The cube. And it's not like Slay the Spire like didn't accomplish something that is worth praising. I think that Slay the Spire, like at the board game, earns some of its praise because it probably was honestly pretty challenging to get the numbers right, to get the feel right, and make all these things like happen. But then at the end of the day, what you're kind of left with is like a big, chunky, long game that you have to like really talk people into spending hours with you to experience. And yes, you get a cooperative experience that is very true to the video game, but I just know that I would be playing it more if it were like shorter, even simpler still, smaller box. Like, you know, if they had just dumbed it down in so many different ways, I think that at least for me, I would have been more excited. But I could totally see it having gone in a direction that made the majority of people just be like, it's not worth my Kickstarter investment, you know? So I don't know where to place that exactly. I just, that's kind of how I'm feeling when I think about these most recent successful IP tie-ins.
I get what you're saying. And I think even though you and I are probably on the fringe, we're probably in the minority here. I'm willing to stand here in this really badly constructed shed that we've built for ourselves.
People are going to start moving in. Just wait, you know, and then we're going to have a little town going of believers.
Make weird IP-based games.
You know, just in general, I think that you're going to hit a point when you're adapting something like this where you think about, okay, how can I make this true to the experience of the original? And you're sort of stretching the limitations, like the boundaries even of like what the board game medium kind of should be. I think of like the packages, like the envelopes that you have to open up that like you are adding to your game slowly. Unlockables in board games. Mm-hmm. I get how that has an appeal, but I think that there's like at the same time, like just a long-term lack of foresight, perhaps in 10, 20 years, talk about shelf stability. It's like you're going to have this like game. It probably still has some amount of resale value, but all that magic is going to be lost because all of those packs have been opened. Well, there's not really a way to reseal stuff.
Now
right?
We're getting into like the value of, that should be an episode, the value of legacy games in a shelf stable environment. I'm going to write that down. So this is one I've thought a lot about. I think that a game where you open envelopes can't be evaluated in a vacuum. Like it needs to be evaluated both from the standings of somebody opening it for the first time in the future, as well as somebody revisiting it in the future. And I think you're kind of creating a straw man to a certain extent of like, well, yeah, you're going to come back to your game where you open all the envelopes and it's not going to be fun anymore. And it's like, A lot of games don't even get played 10 times and they're not legacy games. So like, I don't know that we should really be evaluating them based on how much you play them over time, as much as like how people reflect upon them in the current time compared to when they came out. I think that's more interesting to do. I mean, case in point, you and I play a lot of games once. It doesn't mean that we're not going to think they're good or bad in 5 years. I think it's a weird one to get hung up on because it's analyzing them from a specific perspective of somebody going back to them in the future with the envelopes opened.
It's not exactly like the point I was making, but I hear what you're saying. I'll say this as someone whose side gig currently is evaluating board games, the idea that I don't even know if I've experienced the full or the true game until I've unlocked all the little shits is like kind of annoying.
Like, I don't know. I think it's cool.
Well, and it can be cool. Like I like Pandemic Legacy, for example. I think the difference there, at least for me, is that there's a narrative and there's a point in a direction that Pandemic Legacy is taking you in. It's telling you something with its mechanics, whereas Slay the Spire, and I could be a little bit wrong on this, it feels as if what they were doing was recreating a video game mechanic, something that's specific to that medium, unlocking stuff, and they're recreating it in the board game version. It's like, what exactly does that add to me as a player that I get to unlock stuff? I'm not certain that I see the value in it. And I wonder if in the long term, people are going to look back on that and be like, wow,
this is a very like Big Lebowski. That's just your opinion, man. I don't know. I don't know what to tell you, Tom. I think unlocking things is cool.
I like unlocking things. Don't get me wrong. I just think it's a video game mechanic that we're putting in board games. And it's why?
I think it's fine.
I think it frustrates the underlying kind of assumption of what a board game broadly should be. Legacy is okay. I can live with Legacy because it's doing something. But these legacy elements is where I'm starting to feel a little bit like, come on.
Shall we talk about something else?
I guess I really did have thoughts on this.
So what in your mind does create compelling IP-based games? Are there ones that come to mind that you're like, well, this is a good implementation?
That is a great question because I don't know. It's really funny because the thing that comes to my mind first is like Lord of the Rings, The Duel for Middle Earth or whatever, the recent adaptation of Seven Wonders Duel. We were just kind of talking about how it's like, oh, it's just re-skinning a game that already existed. And it's like, yes, there is that, but there's also a lot of like flavorful, like
there's flourishes,
flourishes, sure. And it's a fine line, right? Because like that game, I think, is doing things that is more interesting than, say, the Cryptozoic deck builders that are just adapting comic book characters. But even those cards, like, at least in theory, can have mechanical identity that would evoke the experiences or the moments and characters of the show. And I think about that with like Magic the Gathering. I think that some of the most successful Universes Beyond stuff they've been doing recently has had good gameplay that is intertwined with evocative themes, characters, and things that a lot of people like. They saw it come through in the gameplay.
I think the reason that the Lord of the Rings Duel probably resonated more with people than like Lord of the Rings Cryptozoic deck building game, which is a thing, is because despite being a reskin as well, I think they did a pretty good job of translating everything so that it feels evocative of whatever characters, settings, things like that are happening. Even something as simple as like comparing strength values, they represented as the Fellowship approaching with the ring versus the Nazgul chasing the Fellowship. It's the same thing. Number go up on each side. You're trying to get a higher number than the other person. But the fact that they represented it with something that feels so tangible to the actual intellectual property, I think goes to show you how far you can go in terms of translating things in a way that's meaningful versus just reskinning things.
I think that's maybe what I'm kind of getting at. You're hitting on something, and hopefully I can articulate this. Rather than figure out how to transmogrify the mechanics of the other medium into the medium that you are adapting it toward. You instead look to use the mechanics of the medium that you are working in to evoke the sensations of the original work.
You are cooking. Yeah, this is the complaint that people had about the Dark Souls board game. They said, this sucks because it's Dark Souls. You know what's not fun to do in a board game that is potentially fun to do in the Dark Souls video game is die over and over and grind. Nobody likes to grind in board games.
Resetting it is a manual process, right?
Exactly. Resetting is a manual process. Plus, it can be awkward with other people around the table. On top of that, the amount of time that you're dedicating in a game like Dark Souls is going to be much more acceptable as an experience than the amount of time that you would dedicate in front of a table. And you don't have the upkeep. The Dark Souls video game translates a lot of the aspects of Dark Souls in a way that I would say is pretty accurate, but it does not give you the same experience as Dark Souls. You're not going, oh, this is so hard. You're going, ugh, this is unfair, or this is stupid. That's not a fun loop. They could have gone more in a direction of like, you know, Oathsworn or Kingdom Death Monster, which is to have a very brutal, punishing game, but where the interesting stuff lies in the cycle versus just having to hit restart.
Yeah.
But I guess they just didn't think to do that.
And I think about this when we talk about adaptations from books, maybe to a movie, for example. You wouldn't want to watch a movie that makes you read a book.
Oh, yeah.
That's kind of like what some of these more recent adaptations I think are failing to, for me, is that they're recreating the experience of playing the video game, and then it just makes me go like, well, why wouldn't I just play the fucking video game and then I don't have to do so much work setting this up? With Dwarf Romantic in particular, I'm going to harp on this one a lot because for me it was a disappointment. It's like I want something that evokes the vibes, the coziness of Dwarf Romantic, but gives me something of a game. Like I think I'd almost want it to just be Calico, but with Dwarf Romantic themes, then be Dwarf Romantic the video game, but you can share it with your wife. Like, okay.
Your partner.
Yeah.
Can we talk Star Wars for a second?
Yeah.
I think Star Wars is exhausting.
Whoa. You're making like enemies of like everyone today. You're like, fuck you, Funko Pop. You fuck you, Star Wars enjoyers.
No. Don't get me wrong. I like the original trilogy. And I like Star Wars Episode 8, obviously, because of the blue milk scene. I think that the Star Wars IP in board gaming is exhausting. And I was trying to figure out why. And I think the reason is because Star Wars characters and settings are pretty shallow in terms of either how they're applied or even just their existence as a whole. And it becomes like readily apparent when you're playing them down on a tableau of things in front of you. I haven't played Star Wars Rebellion, so I can't speak to that one. But I've played a lot of Star Wars games in my time because I like Star Wars, you know? Like I've played Star Wars, the LCG. I've played Star Wars Destiny. I've played Imperial Assault-ish. I didn't finish the game.
Right.
I played Armada. I've played the deck building game that came out recently.
X-Wing.
And I think of all the ones I've listed, the only one that I find that really makes you feel like you're doing something Star Wars is X-Wing. I think X-Wing really stands out in all of those. All the other ones sometimes end up being fun games, but they don't feel like Star Wars. They feel like you're going through the beats of a bunch of characters and things. It's kind of the same criticism I have of Through the Ages. You have all these things that thematically represent stuff that happened in history, but like at the end of the day, like you're just making numbers go up and down. Star Wars, you know, you got this Darth Vader card. We play Star Wars Unlimited too, like same thing. Like you got cards that are very thematic and evocative of the material, but the sum of the parts just feels like a mashup of all these things that are like bumping into each other like action figures that you're playing with as a little kid. I've heard that Rebellion is really evocative, so I can't speak to that one. For me, of the ones I listed, like X-Wing is the only one where I'm really like phew, shoo, coo, you know? And
Right.
maybe it's because it's so focused. It's like a very specific aspect of Star Wars.
Well, it might arguably be the best thing about Star Wars.
Yeah, yeah.
I think like if you could make a board game adaptation of a lightsaber battle, that would probably get you to what you're kind of getting at.
That's Star Wars Epic Duels. I mean, Star Wars Epic
really?
Duels was that, and that got reprinted as Unmatched by Restoration Games, which kind of speaks to how not tied to its particular IP it is, because like you can literally have Bruce Lee fighting, you know, Alice in Wonderland. Again, I think that was another game where there were some interesting things they did with some of the characters in Epic Duels, and I quite enjoyed Epic Duels. I don't think anything in there really is like, oh, it really makes you feel like you're doing a lightsaber battle.
Well, that's probably the angle for a designer when you kind of like are tasked with creating one of these tie-ins. Like, you ultimately want to develop a system that you can sell to as many product placement, you know, people as possible, I'd imagine. Like, you don't want to necessarily build an adaptation that is so specific to Star Wars that it could only ever be Star Wars and it won't make any physical sense.
An interesting core loop that can enable or allow for a lot of factors to be pulled into it that feel evocative of their flavor. But at the same time, that loop is not going to be specific. Contrast the Star Wars games I talked about. And again, I haven't played Rebellion. Maybe Rebellion is this. But like, compare these to like War of the Ring. War of the Ring is a game that is so fundamentally ingrained in its intellectual property that you could not reskin it. The designers even tried to make a Dune version of War of the Ring, and they had some success, some failure, but A, they had to fundamentally retool the entire game. I mean, it's like completely different from War of the Ring. And B, people are still like, yeah, but I don't know if this really hit all the beats. You know, the jury's still out on that more recent Dune War of the Ring game. War of the Ring just feels so much like Lord of the Rings that it's kind of insane. Whereas like, I don't feel that way about these Star Wars games. I feel like you just got a hodgepodge of stuff. And I don't know if that's just because the right one hasn't come along, or, you know, I haven't played the right ones, or maybe it's that Star Wars is actually not really conducive to this.
Well, yeah.
Because you think of Lord of the Rings, right? And you're like, okay, there's these very specific things. It's like a bunch of people from various backgrounds working together for a very noble and important cause, and then against all odds going across this really large area to do this one singular mission where they have a bunch of challenges. What do you say about Star Wars? Spaceship go pew pew in the sky? Like, I don't like, and as someone who likes Star Wars, right? But like, it's more candy like there's not like a, you could talk about the Force and like the opposition between the two sides and things like that, but it feels more like a space opera because that's what it is. It's epic. There's a lot of cool stuff going on, but I don't come out of it being like, that was a very Star Wars coded blank. Right. What is even Star Wars coded? There's no like central framework upon which Star Wars exists that you can then translate to another system. Like maybe that's where the problem is with Star Wars.
You got my brain coming up with like all sorts of like possibilities here. Like what I'm thinking is like the best version of Star Wars is the kind of shit that people wrote because they were actually invested in real world like political ideas, and they were like, oh, I know how to like,
we need the Andor board game.
Exactly, like translates those things into this setting.
I still haven't watched Andor, but I think I can still say we need the Andor.
It's good, and I think that you could create something in theory like that's an asymmetric game where one player is like, and maybe this is what Rebellion is. I haven't played it either. It's like one player's like
keep adding this. Yeah. Like
it'd be we're gonna get like a ton of people that's like, just fucking play Rebellion. That's exactly what you guys described. Because I'm gonna describe something here, and they can tell me. It's like, if you had like the Empire and it's just like it's everywhere and it has like this absolute power, but it can't see what the Rebellion player is
I'm pretty sure that's what you do in Rebellion.
I think that is what it is.
Yeah.
If that's the case, like that is the ideal adaptation. And like, you're totally right. Otherwise, you're just sort of like seeing like, remember this, the card game.
Yeah, exactly.
If the unlimited system is like cool, kind of as its own mechanical identity, and it I don't know, it's okay. I played it. The fact that it could just they could drop the Star Wars IP and probably pick up almost anything else and be shaping cards into it like pretty much right away. Yeah, it definitely hits different than an adaptation that is really trying to like get at what made that source material so good. Yeah. And it really is wonderful when someone understands the assignment to that level and they create something that is intractable to the original work.
Maybe the criticism here is less about Star Wars as an IP. I don't want people taking that away, especially because we haven't played Rebellion. But like, I think it's more just, hey, remember this is like less compelling. And I think Star Wars is a good lens to look at it through because there's so many of these, hey, remember this. And, maybe that's what sets Rebellion apart. Battlestar Galactica. I want to talk about Battlestar Galactica for a second.
Okay.
This game, kudos to Fantasy Flight Games. First of all, a lot of the games that we've been talking about, especially the ones that are successful, are coming out of Fantasy Flight. They've always been really ambitious about representing theme first and representing it in a way that's effective, which makes it all the more painful that Star Wars Unlimited really does feel like a, hey, remember this kind of game. But Battlestar Galactica, the reason the game works is not because of the little spaceships moving around outside and stuff like that. Like, that stuff is auxiliary. That's really there for the chrome. The reason the game works is because of the feeling that it generates. The fact that like you truly don't know who to trust and everybody's action feels suspicious. And then halfway through the game, you might realize that even though you thought you were good, you're actually bad. That is like so true to the series in a way that is like immensely compelling, that I think that's the reason that this game has captivated so many people. Because at the end of the day, all the things you do in the game, kind of going back to Stefan Feld, like it could have been anything. That's not really what makes it Battlestar Galactica. It's that feeling of like a very specific sentiment of social deduction. It's not just social deduction. It's like that specific, everybody sus. Why did you do that? Oh God, I am actually bad. I just think that game captures that in a way that is so very good. That's how it gets away with its 8-hour playtime of bullshit.
Yeah, I think you're right. Like, when the IP hits, it should hit hard. It should be so evocative. It should be like something that stands out as the epitomal experience of that medium.
You want people to do like the Wojak O face. You don't want people to do the Leo DiCaprio pointing at the TV face.
Yes. That's the moral of this episode. I think that's like the perfect note to end it on. Create something that will make users on Blue Sky or X or whatever reblog it with soy jack captions, not Leonardo DiCaprio pictures. Yeah, I think that's going to do it for this week's episode. Thanks so much for listening to this, you beautiful, beautiful person. We really appreciate you. Thank you especially to Michael, Tyler, Devon, and Josh of the Boise RainBeaus for your sweet segue music. And thank you to Bonehouse for letting us use your song Raw as our opening theme.
If you're loving the cast, share it with a friend or on Reddit or on BGG. You can also reach out to us directly at shelfstablecast@gmail.com. All this and more in the show notes. And if you like what we're doing and want to make more of it happen, consider subscribing to us on Patreon. You'll get access to bonus content and Discord.
Next week, Kenny, I think we have a very special something.
Oh.
I don't know what the topic is.
Yeah, I don't know that we talked about it.
But tune in next week for a cool something. See you then.